How's it going, guys? Thanks so much for clicking on this video. This is a CDL Talent Roundtable discussion where all of us as talent got together, put our heads together, and basically talked on each and every single CDL roster heading into MW2. We chat on what was their journey last season, what they've currently constructed, and the way that this roster could look or this team could look moving into the MW2 year. So major thank you to all of the talent for joining in on this, for having these conversations, as well as to Bryce, who actually orchestrated all of this stuff to come together. Now the full-on VODs will have a full part 1 and a full part 2. Those links rather will be in the description of this video that you can feel free to check out to watch it more in long form. If you want to check out certain teams, certain snippets, I will have that here located on the channel. If you haven't seen your favorite teams upload yet, I promise it's coming. We talked about all 12 of them. So make sure to let us know, whether through different content pieces, if you want to tweet, comment, like, subscribe, any way that you guys can show us some support to let us know that you guys like content like this. We would love to hear it. We'd love to hear your guys' feedback, output on ways that we could even make it better. So without further ado, I'll leave you to it. Enjoy the video, and I'll see you back here on the channel really soon.
All right, hello and welcome to the Talent Roundtable. The CDL season is here, and it's time to start talking about the teams, what's been going on in the past, what's been going on in the present, and what might happen in the future. Joining me, of course, all these wonderful, talented people, brains of Call of Duty. Basically, what's going to happen, we're going to go through the teams individually, talk about the players, talk about the history of the franchises, results, and how we feel about them all. You can take this as a little primer as we kind of move through. It's going to be a little bit loose and fast, but hopefully you'll know more going after this. All right, we're going to start with Boston Breach. New boys last year. This year, coming into it, no longer new. The veterancy is still going to be there in players like METHODZ. Who wants to kind of kick us off and talk about what do you think of this team?
I'll do it,
So
Bryce.
we're going to start with the past.
Over here.
Orlando, last year, Boston Breach. Talk to me.
Yeah, man. Like I don't know. I thought we were all pretty hyped at different moments for Boston Breach. It felt like they had taken some decent strides to the middle of the season. I feel like the results never were really there. Like I feel like we constantly were trying to put them, above the top 6. And they did make some good roster changes throughout the year. I feel like, bringing in Vivid, him combining with Nero on the SMG line was really a bright spot for the roster. But I felt like everything kind of headed into to champs and did not end out the way that they wanted. Like a Game 5 round 11 loss to the Thieves, who later go on to win the whole thing. They were pretty bruised and battered after that. I know METHODZ has talked about it pretty consistently about how that was one of the worst losses and one of the most difficult losses that they've ever suffered. Was continually, it was almost like a perfect example of like what the season was for them last year, which was close, but not close enough necessarily to be considered a top contender or a consistent one at that. That I think they went out of champs like in last place.
Yes,
and so I don't know. It was a weird year for Boston, but I feel like, not to talk too early about them, but I do feel like they did make some pretty good upgrades coming into this upcoming season. So
take Boston last year, right? Where do we think was their actual consistency level? Like, cause I remember at the start of the season, somebody we talked about them being a potential top 3 team. Yeah. Then about halfway through the season, like Jay, what happened? Because was that a fluke peak for them, or did everything go wrong after?
I just think in the beginning of the season, this team was just so very young. Like, you didn't really know what to expect out of this Boston Breach team. You're bringing in rookies and Nero and Capsule in the beginning. Their S&D was the best in the game at that point. But then when you start to understand the game a little bit more, obviously teams getting better at respawn, that's where they start to lack off. But they always at least shined in Search and Destroy. That's where they were always able to put themselves through series, get through game 5s whenever they needed to. But once their S&D started to lack off, obviously they make that roster change for Vivid, then their respawn jumps up. So that point, it's just a mirror effect. You get better at respawns, and now your S&D starts lacking off. I just feel like in the beginning of the season, a lot of these teams, this was a brand new organization. This is a team that just came in for the first time into CDL last year. They came in with a lot of, like, not really high expectations just because of the players that they had. That was the last team that was formed last year. So the fact that they were able to put something together and basically be a top 8 team consistently throughout the year was pretty good for them. The only thing that took me like out of this roster was when it came down to those crucial moments, those big time games, those big time plays. When they didn't do well in Search and Destroy, we saw how those series went for them. Was not easy. It was like a 3-0 or 3-1 if they're not winning their Search and Destroys. I think now, though, going into this year with this roster, since they've decided to stick together, at least 3 of them did, and then you bring in Awakening Awakening is going to be the slayer for this squad. Like METHODZ is going to be the slow stationary AR, so that's going to work out in this game. And you have Awakening and Nero who are going to be your aggressive players, and then Vivid, he's going to be the route man. So I feel like this team is going to be set up for success going into this year. But at least one thing that they would need to focus on is just to make sure their search and destroy is on point, because a lot of these other teams did make roster changes. A lot of these other teams look a lot better in search and destroy. So if they can get their search and destroy on point and keep their respawns at like an even 50-50, I feel like this team can go from a top 8 team to like a top 4 potentially.
Okay.
And I just wanted to kind of go in about last year as well, that they were actually quite brave, I think, as well, like kind of touching on what Jay just said in terms of bringing those youngsters in. We actually had conversations with people like Zed, the coaching staff in there, him and Denz, kind of helped them make the choice of taking some risks instead of just going with the tried and tested. Capsule didn't quite work out. We've seen some flashes here and there. Will that ever be the last thing we ever see of him? I'm not too sure. I don't think so. He seemed talented enough, but
Capsule was a great example, by the way. A great example, because nobody was sure whether or not he should have been in the league.
Yeah.
That was the original question, right? Like, this player placed what, top 32, I think was his best placement?
Yeah, something like that.
And then I'll be honest with you, I was impressed by him. I think it's disappointing to not see him try with another team. Or, I know he's trying, but
yeah, I think he initially justified the position because of, I mean, the third place at the first event, outside of kickoff, of course, their general form. He justified it at that stage, but obviously things just never kind of kept up that speed a little bit. It seems he ran out of steam just ever somewhat. And yeah, I don't know. But the risk they took on Nero in a certain way as well, and that's kind of worked out, right? So I mean, look, they were saying at the beginning of the season, we wanted to take some risk and find a team that potentially could win an event rather than just pick up somebody who we know is going to be all right for top 8. But now they're kind of, these things haven't necessarily worked out, but props to them for actually having that little bit of a different thinking when it came to making their team.
Yeah. I think coming into this year, as we slowly start to get towards the present of this team, roller coaster was the only thing I can think of last year for Boston Breach, and not a great ending. Just not a great ending for what they saw. Struggled for it. And speaking of roller coasters, I want to talk about METHODZ. We know start of the season looked phenomenal. Really bogged down in the middle. Still on the roster this year. He is essentially their franchise player. We know that he's behind, that's the player they keep trotting out in front of the cameras. It's the most popular player on Boston Breach. How do we feel about him? He's probably headlining this roster again, right?
Oh, yeah. Without question, METHODZ is. And I feel like with METHODZ last year, with him starting off, he was just very grateful to just be in the league. Because remember, he was on Toronto Ultra before that, and then a brand new organization comes in, and then he's actually the captain for the team. So he's blessed to take that spot. And now that Boston had bring him back, they expect a lot out of this guy. He's the face of the franchise. Obviously, in the beginning of last year, like you said, he was frying. He was a stationary AR who could just run around, hold his pre-aim before people actually understood how to push him out or how to play the game correctly. He was frying in the beginning of the year. But then as, like I said, teams started to get more comfortable. Teams understand how you play, what tendencies you have if you're a certain player. And with METHODZ, he's going to be that slow guy. You're going to know, like, if that guy, if you're looking for one, he's most likely pre-aiming, trying to go for a spawn, or just holding his iron down to trying to pick up some kills. So going into this year for Modern Warfare 2, I feel like for METHODZ, it's going to be great, because this is a nice slow and steady wins the race kind of game. So as long as his SMGs are staying aggressive, then you have the flex player in Awakening who's going to be an aggressor when he needs to, also can slow down whenever he needs to. This is going to allow METHODZ to really be who he wants to be on the map. Just play for the spawns, hold your pre-aims. No one's going to get out camera for you. And I feel like this year compared to last year, he's going to be a little bit better for this team.
I do feel like there is an element, though, that some people might forget, which was that during the offseason, it was rumored that Clay was going to be going to that team. Like, Clay was going to be taking his spot away. And so it feels like these last few years, honestly, ever since like franchising has begun, like METHODZ is always fighting for his spot, or even fighting for the reasoning to actually be on the team. And so I do feel like it was a big deal for him to be re-signed to this roster, to be in this position, to be in the spot to lead what is expected to be a more improving Boston Breach roster, as we keep bringing up Big Wake, which I'm glad that we have. But I also think there is an interesting element to it as well, that like early on in scrimmages, I remember watching some of their streams and METHODZ was having some fun with it, but you can tell like it does irk him a little bit. Like he was bringing up, like he was tweeting out like Awakening and Nero's stream, and he was like, yeah, guys, Clay wouldn't do this for you, but hey, I'm here and I'm happy to do it for you. Like he's already having those little digs in there. So I think as we've talked about, it feels like you could discuss, if we cut the season halfway through, like, midway through like Major 2, you'd be like, oh yeah, of course METHODZ is going to be on this roster. And then things started to tail off a little bit. It feels like another season in which the guy who is leading this team is trying to also validate the fact that he is capable of running a very, very interesting franchise heading into their second season.
It's funny you mentioned that, because that sort of shit is funny until it's not.
Yeah.
Right? That's like, it's, oh yeah, you know, thanks for not getting rid of me for Clay, guys. And then like 2 majors in this year, and you're like, oh god, they've not had a good time.
Yeah.
Who's going? And bearing in mind, there's already been jokes about their substitute. Like, that was a meme a little while ago. Beans is waiting in the wings.
Serious. That guy's serious, dude.
And he's not a bad player. Like, Charles, you ever said a lot about Boston. How are you feeling about the roster?
I mean, this team to me just strikes me as like everybody sort of needs to figure out ways to evolve. Like METHODZ had time in stage 2 or whatever it was where he was looking like one of the top players in the game. Awakening for the past few years has those moments where he evolves in a big way, and we just like see it. Same thing for Nero, has the pop-off games, like kill leader on Bocage, I think by the end of the year, one of the highest kills in S&D. Like, and same thing for Vivid. All 4 have that potential to be near the top of the league. Just it's always brief. It never lasts for like a consistent portion of the year across multiple stages. So I think it's about bringing it together, like finding ways to evolve your gameplay, whether that gets done in practice, whether that is a game mode specific thing, whether that gets orchestrated and just like being a better communicator to your teammates, or just like finding better ways to develop chemistry. But I think the team has really good potential. I mean, even for the core we're talking about from you know, the disappointing last place finish at champs last year, wasn't it literally like a game 5 round 11 or something against Thieves that like nearly won? So like, it's again, they are right there. All 4 of these play. Like, I think the jokes about Beans, like, don't get me wrong, Beans is fantastic, but I don't see a world where METHODZ gets dropped unless he like completely drops the ball. But I think he's underrated as a player. I just see nothing but potential with this squad, but like, they do have to find ways to get better. And I don't know if we're talking about Thieves today, but Octane in my mind is like a good example of this. Of like, for years he was always super top-notch AR, the human turret, something like that. But now when I look at Octane, I'm like, dude, that guy has the best comms in the game. Like, he found a way to evolve his gameplay and like kick it up a notch. And I just think for the Boston team, all 4 of these players, they're all fantastic, but they have to find a way to level up. And if they do that, they could be a force all year.
I like that. I think it's probably also worth mentioning, by the way, a player, as far as I'm concerned, experience-wise, a player evolving their own gameplay dramatically happens rarely. It is something you really need to keep an eye on when it happens, because it is something special. You got to remember, they all players believe they are the best. Period. And they just
not some of them. Not some.
Well, if they don't believe they're the best, they need to get out of the league.
What's the list, Jay? What's the
list? There's a bunch of players that know that they ain't the best. I promise you. Like, you see that Vegas Legion squad? They got a guy named Prolude. He knows he's not the best as we see in the game. He knows that he's got to shoot him against Simp and Abizi. Like, you know, there's levels to this shit, and you got to make sure you're on point to compete with the best. You can't be delusional.
I feel like a lot of pros are. But so before we're going to wrap this up in a bow and figure out where we think they're actually going to go this year, I want to talk about Awakening. I think Awakening is a key member for the Boston Breach this year. We've spoken about METHODZ, Nero, and Vivid. They had their stories last year. Awakening is going into a new franchise from these, out of that Mutineers team that we didn't think was particularly good, right? We didn't think they worked well. We don't think they had it kind of locked down. Is this Awakening's time to shine, right? Or do we expect him to still have these streaky moments, but ultimately the team doesn't work very well? Basically what I'm saying is, this make or break for Awakening?
No. I don't think that's the case at all. I think Awakening is going to make it happen wherever the hell he is, just because of the talent that kid has. Like, even last year when he was on the Florida roster, they were struggling with roles the entire time. They had 3 ARs. They had one submachine gun. One time Awakening would be super aggressive, switch it to an SMG. Sometimes he might have to play the spawn in the back. I think with this year, with the structure of Boston Breach, he knows exactly what he needs to do. Awakening, I'm looking at you. All you got to do is pick up some kills. That's literally all you got to do. The spawns are going to be in focus of Vivid and Nero as they're rotating around with their subs. You're also going to have METHODZ, who's going to be in the back holding those spawns. So all I'm waking is just simply getting your kills. And that's not a hard issue for the young man, because he's gross.
And that's one thing, that I feel like Boston did a great job of picking him up, is that you know, who knows what could happen to the meta this season. Like if we do run into a situation, or like maps last year where you had to have somebody, you had to have a roster that could function on Bocage and a roster that could function on Gavutu. I don't know if we're going to have that extreme example this season necessarily, but let's say that we did. That's great, because Awakening can be the guy who runs a third sub and have total success with it. He can also run that AR. We've seen him slow it down heavily, even in games like MW 2019. And with the role that he plays, like we all know, like the SMGs are, you know, super, super important. But I feel like the flex role, especially last year, even coming into this year, is super crucial. And I feel like Big Wake is going to be in a spot where he has the ability to shine. So, and this roster needs that too. Like the roster, like Jay said, they need the kills. He can definitely do that.
I like it. I like it. I think Awakening is going to be a key player to keep an eye on. I want to see what he does outside of Florida. And also this Boston Breach team, the one thing they've done is they've gone for a good substitute. I like that when teams do it. I think it's a very smart decision. If anything goes wrong during the year, or they think they need something extra, I fully believe we'll see Beans in the CDL. If
that European talent we keep talking about, Brycey, we keep banging that drum.
I mean, not only that, right? But they've got 2 European coaches. Right,
well, there you go.
B-Sport Joss has joined. He's in there as well, so I think it'll be good. Right, let's do Future Boston Breach. Future, hello, Ant. Welcome to this. Boston
nice jacket,
Breach.
by the way. Nice jacket, like that.
Man, you guys got smoked.
I don't want to talk about it.
How do we think Boston Breach do this year? It's a horrible time to call this. We've seen no games. We've just seen some scrims, but it's fun. Do we think they're walking away with multiple championships? Do we think they're having a middle year? Do we think they're doing better than last year? What do we think?
Who wants to start?
Just jump in. It doesn't have to be.
I'll kind of go. I think it's going to kind of be in and around the same, because I think you know, we can talk on a broad spectrum. I feel like for the most part, I think there's maybe one team that I think is maybe an outlier, but I don't think there's anybody here, more than one team, that's now a whipping boy. Now I feel like everyone's spread out quite nicely, and overall the teams have mostly all improved. I think on a level that most teams look pretty decent, and on paper right now, obviously it's easy to say this right now before we haven't played any games. On paper, I feel like a lot of these teams, when you stack them up against each other, it looks like every single game is going to be pretty good. Like, you know, you would say in terms of achievement, et cetera, a lot of these teams look very, very decent this year. Whereas last year, we immediately picked out a couple of teams which we thought weren't going to do great, and we were right for the most part. Whereas now, I think it's a little bit harder to ascertain that at this moment in time. So I think it's going to be a hard year to be consistent. Many different factors in that one, of course. But so I'm kind of going to go with about the same. I would have them top 8.
I disagree.
Yeah,
I think this team is going to be better this year. I think this is a better Breach.
Well, I think the team overall is probably better, but I think everybody else has kind of made some good roster changes as well.
I think that's kind of what I'm going to go with. I think it's more consistent, better placings.
I think it's definitely more consistent on the side of Boston Breach. When it comes to winning championships, though, that's probably not going to be in their cup of tea. Like, they're not going to be looking forward to that. Honestly, when they
agree, I think
there's way too many other teams that are like a lot more fluent with their game, especially with communication. I feel like with Boston picking up Awakening, he's a guy that usually just focus on kills, and he's probably not going to talk as much. So everyone else is going to have to step up in the communication at that point. That might cost them a couple matches. I feel like Boston are going to stick around the top 6, the top 8 range. If they surprise and potentially make it through a winners bracket side at a major, they could potentially get a top 3. But I feel like this team is just still a little bit under the experience, even though a couple rookies did get a lot of it last year. I just feel like when they go up against teams like Atlanta, when they go up against teams like Thieves, when they go up against teams like Optic Texas, or even Seattle, even Toronto, there's a lot of teams in here that made a lot of adjustments. So those matches for them are going to be really difficult, because now you have to get SMGs versus SMGs to play at their best, and then your ARs need to perform at their best. And I feel like Boston Breach will get caught slipping a couple times this year to where they cannot win an event. A top 6 to top 8 at the best for me all year.
That's kind of was my point as well. It's like there's other teams in and around it who have all improved as well. Yeah. So you can't just expect them to break that top 6. That there is 6 teams who I would say look better than them personally.
While it's unusual for me to be positive, I'm actually quite positive about the Breach. I think they're my dark horse to really shock some people. And we're going to move on. But do you want to stick a button on this? What do you think?
I think it's a no-brainer if they get better. I mean, they picked up Awakening. You guys know me. I've been a big supporter of him for a long time. I think he's a fantastic player, great slayer. When I look at this team, also like Nero in the second half of the season was playing phenomenal. So like in terms of SMG play, they have Vivid and Nero. Vivid is always extremely aggressive. I think that's going to translate well in this game. Decision-making got a lot better. Bringing in Awakening, I think can only make them better. I thought TJ was one of the guys who was prone to the bad game, would make some questionable decisions. And I think with Big Wake, they're going to be dangerous to those top teams that maybe will get away with just outslaying them, putting the pressure on them. So I think Boston definitely improves from this. I think they can definitely get top 4 at a couple events, and they're a dark horse.